This video is brought to you by True Tales of Buried Treasure, the largest collection of old treasure magazines in the West. On our website, you can search for individual treasure stories by region, or buy our original magazines themselves. To pay us a visit, please click on the link in the description. Enjoy. Between the towns of Reliance, Delaware, Maryland, Federalsburg, Maryland, and Seaford, Delaware, along the Nanticoke River, lies a hidden treasure, a cache of gold eagles worth between $75,000 and $150,000. This fortune was buried in the early 1800s by the infamous Fat Patty Cannon. Known for her murderous ways, Patty preyed on wealthy slave traders and anyone else who carried significant sums of gold. Her tavern, located near Reliance, Delaware, Maryland, became the site of these crimes, and the stolen gold was buried along the riverbanks that bordered her property. Since 1910, small portions of the treasure have been unearthed by local farmers. To date, approximately $12,500 has been recovered, but it is widely believed that the bulk of the fortune remains hidden. Given the numismatic value of these 170-year-old gold eagles, whoever discovers the rest of the treasure will find themselves far richer than they ever imagined. My fascination with buried treasure led me to this story after a friend from New York sent me a 1967 clipping from the New York Times real estate section. The article itself wasn't particularly captivating until I read about Patty Cannon's dark deeds, sparking my curiosity and prompting me to investigate further. The town of Reliance straddles the Delaware-Maryland border, with the 2-acre plot where Patty's Tavern once stood located on the Delaware side. As I dug deeper into her history, I uncovered a chilling account of her criminal enterprise, which she ran with her husband Jesse and son-in-law Joseph Johnson. On a warm evening in June 1819, Edwin Ravenel, a wealthy Tidewater, Virginia plantation owner, arrived at Patty Cannon's Tavern near the Nanticoke River. He carried $10,000 in gold eagles in his saddlebags, intending to purchase slaves for his plantation on the Rappahannock. Patty, originally from Canada and described as a buxom, black-eyed woman, had a reputation for selling slaves at reasonable prices, as well as providing food, lodging, and imported rum. Upon his arrival, Edwin's horse was stabled by Patty's husband, Jesse, a simple drunkard who handled chores around the tavern. Meanwhile, Joseph Johnson tended the bar and assisted Patty in her schemes. Both men were entirely under Patty's control. Historical documents from Dorchester County, Maryland, and Sussex County, Delaware, depict her as a woman of extraordinary physical strength and a violent temper. Accounts suggest she could subdue a strong man and swiftly tie him up, dragging him to the attic where she kept others she had captured. Other grim records reveal that Patty's Tavern contained 5 fireplaces, one of which she reportedly used to dispose of children who annoyed her with their cries. That evening, Edwin expressed his desire to buy slaves to Joseph Johnson, who informed him that only Patty could handle such transactions. Joseph assured Edwin that Patty would return later that night and suggested he try a new shipment of West Indies rum while waiting. Edwin agreed. As Edwin sipped his drink, Joseph excused himself, claiming he needed to fetch more rum from a shed behind the tavern. Outside, Patty awaited him with a loaded musket. Handing the weapon to Joseph, she instructed him to act. Joseph positioned the musket at the open window behind Edwin and pulled the trigger, sending Edwin Ravenel to his grave. Fat Patty Cannon and her son-in-law Joe Johnson carried Edwin Ravenel's lifeless body out of the tavern and into the wooded glen behind the property. There, her husband Jesse waited with a 2-wheeled cart. Together, they transported the corpse across the Delaware state line, dumping it into the roadside bushes. The body was discovered the following day. The authorities in Sussex County, Delaware, reported the deceased man, Edwin Ravenel of Rappahannock, Virginia, was murdered by unknown persons who absconded with his belongings and his horse. This grim incident marked the first of many such reports over the following decade. Planters, slave traders, and other visitors to Patty's secluded tavern met similar fates. Over 10 years, more than 37 bodies were found near the Delaware side of the Reliance area. Most of the valuables Fat Patty stole from her victims, including gold coins and personal effects, were buried on her property. Her husband Jesse sold the stolen horses, posing as a successful trader in cities like Richmond and Petersburg, Virginia. Estimates of Patty's hidden fortune suggest she buried between $75,000 and $100,000 in various caches around her land during her years of criminal activity. However, events took an unexpected turn for Fat Patty when she fell in love with one of her intended victims. His first name is lost to history, but his last name was Harris, a strong, handsome slave trader from the Bay Area near the headwaters of the Nanticoke River. Patty had already made the usual preparations for his demise, and Jesse had hitched the horses to the cart they called the Death Cart. But when Joe Johnson joined Patty in the shaded glen behind the tavern, she refused to hand him the musket. "He came here to buy slaves, so let him buy slaves," Patty declared. Joe stared at her in shock. "Sell slaves? Why not trade bullets for gold like we always do?" Ignoring him, Patty returned to the tavern and smiled warmly at Harris. She struck a deal to sell him 8 slaves for $7,600. Harris paid $3,800 up front for 4 of the slaves and walked them to a skiff moored on the Nanticoke River, promising to return the next night for the remaining 4. That evening, Jesse Cannon was absent from the tavern, but Patty was used to his unpredictable comings and goings. She didn't notice until she heard a horse approach the tavern porch. Sending Joe to investigate, he returned with unsettling news. Jesse had arrived carrying a pistol and had hidden a bag of gold in the stable manger. "Looks like Jesse killed Harris and stole his gold," Joe reported. Enraged, Patty confronted Jesse, who confessed to the crime and handed her the stolen sack of gold, which contained $5,300 in $10 gold coins. The next morning, Patty seemed to have calmed down. She prepared a hearty breakfast for Jesse and reassured him. "What's done is done," she said. "No use crying or quarreling about it." Jesse sat down to eat, but moments later he began choking, collapsing into convulsions. He died swiftly, his stomach knotted in agony. Joe, watching in horror, accused Patty of poisoning Jesse. "You've killed him," he exclaimed. "I had to," Patty replied coldly. But in their haste to deal with Harris and Jesse, Patty and Joe overlooked one critical detail: the 4 slaves Harris had taken with him. Unbeknownst to them, the slaves had escaped and were found wandering the Federalsburg-Seaford Road, still shackled in pairs. When questioned by Delaware authorities, the freed slaves revealed that they had been among several held captive in the attic of Fat Patty Cannon's tavern. They also confirmed that Jesse Cannon had murdered Harris and stolen his gold. Their testimony provided damning evidence against Patty and her murderous operation. The escaped slaves identified Jesse Cannon as one of their captors, recalling how he had fed them while they were imprisoned in the attic. When lawmen arrived at the tavern, they found Fat Patty Cannon and Joe Johnson preparing to transport Jesse's body to Delaware. Attempting to explain Jesse's sudden death, Patty claimed he had accidentally ingested rat poison, and they were simply planning to give him a decent Christian burial. When questioned about Harris's murder, Patty and Joe denied knowing him or that he had visited the tavern. Patty also vehemently denied killing any of her patrons or imprisoning slaves in her attic. Her overzealous denials, however, only heightened the officers' suspicions. Joe Johnson eventually cracked under the pressure of interrogation. He confessed to the murders, accusing his mother-in-law, Patty, of orchestrating them all, including the poisoning of her husband, Jesse. The lawmen then opened the trapdoor leading to the attic, where they were overwhelmed by the foul stench. Inside, they discovered 3 men and 2 women chained together, trembling in fear. It took time to reassure the captives that they were safe, but once calmed, their testimonies corroborated those of the slaves Harris had purchased. They revealed they were runaway slaves fleeing plantations in the South when Patty and Joe captured them. 2 of the women recounted a horrific detail: that Patty had thrown their children into the tavern's fireplace because their crying had annoyed her. Investigators raked through the fireplace ashes and found charred skulls and bones, damning evidence of Patty's heinous crimes. Fat Patty and Joe were promptly arrested and taken to Georgetown, Delaware, where they were charged with murder and kidnapping. Patty, however, never faced trial. In April 1829, just days before her hearing, she was found dead in her jail cell, having likely ingested poison she had concealed. Joe Johnson wasn't so fortunate. He was convicted and executed by hanging. For decades after the arrests, Paddy Cannon's Tavern remained a sinister landmark, avoided by locals who believed it was haunted. Tales of ghostly apparitions and eerie sounds emerged. The creaking wheels of Jesse's death cart, the screams of enslaved children and restless spirits roaming the tavern halls. Eventually, the inn was demolished and a small 2-story house was built on the site. The property changed hands over the years and was owned by a shopkeeper named Smith until his death in 1966. According to a New York Times report, the 2-acre tract and the house were later sold at auction for $6,000 to Smith's daughter-in-law. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to read the original article or purchase the magazine from which it was taken, please check out our website, truetalesofburiedtreasure.com.